Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Punto e a Capo. It is Thursday, February 19th, and we are witnessing many things, many new things, others a little less so. But this nation, this world of scandals practically continues to move forward. And today we find ourselves with three main news stories. The first is about the arrest of a member of the English royal family, Prince Andrew for some, the former prince for others. And there the first controversy is saying that this person has not been stripped of the title of prince because it has not been decided by parliament. And here too, there will be many people who indulge in these curiosities. We provide it only for the sake of reporting. On the other hand, the more important one, in my opinion, is related to this concentration, this tangle, let's call it that, of military initiatives that are still focusing on the area of Iran, with a small variation this time. This time we have Russian ships, we have Chinese ships, we have a particular detection systems, and it is almost certain that if Iran were attacked, it is ready to close the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the main route where many oil tankers pass from Iraq and nearby areas from Saudi Arabia, and they come to bring this oil to Europe predominantly. This would immediately mean a blockade and an energy crisis of significant importance. Therefore, it is concerning. At this moment, we know that there is the largest American aircraft carrier, which is the Gerald Ford, and it has 16 destroyers. There is talk of a few thousand planes in those areas from different countries, because this might be the slightly more concerning news, not there in the Gulf, but in the area, some in the area where they have arrived in Cyprus. So it is unclear why these European NATO countries have made this movement of planes to these areas. Naturally, the concern having reached this level is quite significant. At the same time, we have news of this board of peace that is being this union of willing states, in quotes. So we have the willing for war, well known, led by the English and by Monsieur Macron, And on the other side, we have this boarding of peace organized by President Trump and other states, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. There are about 51 states that have joined this initiative promoted by the American president. Will it lead to something? For now, they have gathered quite a few billion, and it remains to be seen what will come out of this initiative. The important thing, in my opinion, is that a result is achieved and that peace finally arrives in that area and the suffering ends. May the people residing in those areas finally have the opportunity to breathe and not be in constant fear of being killed or suffering from hunger due to the hardships in those regions. These are some of the main news items we have seen. There are other, side news. We saw the doubt they had here in Italy, saying, but who is going to this? First meeting of the boarding of peace, who is going? Does Mrs. Meloni go, or does the foreign minister Tajani go? Tajani said, no, I'll go. And I think he declared this by throwing the ball forward, as they say, so that there was no turning back. Tajani, whom we have seen as a protagonist in many things lately, says Italy will be a determining part in a surely strategic position as an observer. Now here, let me understand, there's a team that operates, there's someone who goes ahead doing things, and you just sit there watching, and so you'll be an important part. What are they? The importance is that we can go to those lines of retirees who stand watching while they are repairing the roads, while they are rebuilding something where there are construction sites and works. So these are the observers. So, of course, and some criticism can be made, right? You say, but it seems to me that the cement they poured there isn't that good, you see. And so it only took Tajani's presence for someone to say that Italy is present in this maneuver to bring peace. And since there are constitutional constraints that limit participation if there is no international consensus, and this does not come from bodies officially recognized or with votes in parliament and so on, he says. But here we have the observers. The observer is the scout who goes to take a look, sits there in the gallery to see for a moment what the others decide and do. This is a bit the situation. Tegliani was also recognized for his character when he lashed out against the Russian athletes who participated in these Paralympic Games and Olympics. We know of people who have had the misfortune of having impairments, and so it's not right that these gentlemen, right, they went with the Russia flag and the Russian anthem. I would say that they really hit rock bottom. If these Olympics were supposed to be something that eliminated discussions of war, we saw it with the Winter Olympics and also with the others. Well, what did they serve for? To certify divisions and to give space to one side and not the other. So the objective through sport of uniting nations and uniting people, we can clearly say has gone down the drain. Other international news that we have seen, we have news coming from South Korea. Let's remember that there was this attempted martial law coup by former President Yoon, who was facing a sentence of with the death penalty. There was no death penalty sentence for this attempted coup and martial law, but there was a life imprisonment sentence, and that's what happened there. Another piece of news that we have seen being covered by all the newspapers is what happened in France. And unfortunately, some Italian newspaper reported this news very, very poorly. It says, but a Christian extremist was killed in clashes between opposing factions. So this is it. This is it. Without naming names, Il Sole 24 already came out with an article of this kind. We are talking about the lynching of a young man of 24 years old named Quentin de Hong. And this boy was portrayed as a violent person. It was just that there was a normal authorized demonstration, and we saw left-wing extremists heroically jump on this boy and lynch him with 11 people. So violence is never okay. But it's even worse when violence has ideological justifications, is not condemned by political forces, and carries weight. Why? Because sometimes violence can also serve as an example to incite further violence. And we did not see this great decision. Let's remember what happened with that African American who had been killed by the police, and the protest that immediately arose worldwide, racism, criminals. We even had in the Italian parliament Mrs. Boldrini, who kneeled precisely as a sign of suffering, right? And in a sense of compassion towards this person, Mrs. Boldrini regretted being fight. So she knelt before this suffering of color. Well, how many people have we seen kneeling for this young man who was a Christian, who was practicing, who was an activist, and we even saw him being called a Christian fundamentalist. Christian fundamentalist, as if he were someone going around killing or beating those who were not Christians. These are things that leave one extremely puzzled, extremely perplexed, because it is not conceivable. To the point that we saw a lady Meloni, the Italian prime minister, who found herself in the position to comment on this fact of it is absolutely intolerable, it is absolutely unacceptable. So what happened there? Well, what happened is that in France, the matter was not well received. How come? Mrs. Meloni dares to come and criticize French matters that are strictly within the competence of French politicians, French politics, or the French judiciary. And then there was Mr. Macron, who came and said it's trouble for a foreign state, a foreign prime minister, to be interested in French problems. That's the point. The point is all to be understood. We remind those with short memories that when the Meloni government was formed, there was even a French government minister who said, let's see how this Italian government behaves. Otherwise, we will take measures. And let's also remember that the same logic came from Brussels, from Mrs. Meloni, right? Well, this democracy, this fake European democracy that we keep seeing, let's remember the famous news, right, regarding the election in Romania. Do you remember that candidate who wasn't suitable because there were interferences on social media by the Russians who had meddled, who had pushed with fakes, with this and that? Well, very well, after I don't know how many years, it turned out to be a hoax. So, Priya Sote, what interference do we have in the European elections? What interference do we have in the political freedom of each European country? This is a bit of a heavy concern. It's coming forward with a certain consistency. He says, but how? If the election doesn't go well, so let's also remember that there was always a former French European commissioner who said, but we monitor the elections. If the elections don't go well, there will be a need, and Europe will take measures to ensure things are done properly. So here we need to start understanding each other. We need to start figuring it out. But how willing are we to accept these abuses, to accept these forms of violence, anti-democratic violence against people who elect their own representatives and express their own political thoughts? Because in the end, the point is this. And then the other matter that is extremely worrying, we had this Munich Security Conference where we saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio speak very clearly. Let's remember that the year before, Vice President J.D. Vance had come to Europe to speak and had warned the European states, saying, be careful, you are fighting against your own citizens. You are trying to fight against the majority of your citizens who have a different opinion from yours. And so this is the principle of dictatorships. When you try in every way to hinder someone who thinks differently from you and who could jeopardize your desire and possibility to attain power, and this is somewhat what we have seen and what we are seeing. This Europe that says, but I take the right to go and influence on behalf of any states. It is truly, truly causing disasters. One of the biggest problems we Italian citizens have in a European context is called energy. It's called energy costs. It's called the inability of our companies to be competitive in the short term. And then imagine another thing. If the Strait of Hormuz were closed due to an ongoing war, maybe for weeks, for months, we would have a real energy shock. Energy shock for whom? For some countries that are extremely fragile in terms of energy. One of these is Italy. Let's remember that Spain, where Spanish citizens pay less for electricity than Italians do, has also implemented plans with alternative energy. They had a big problem this summer. Let's remember there was this blackout because there was no flexibility in managing the energy demand and the availability of energy. But in fact, they produce energy. We buy electricity from the French. Yes, from the French, who have those famous nuclear power plants that they managed to completely restore no more than 7 or 8 months ago, and they have a certain guarantee and a certain security of continuity. But imagine what could happen if this energy shock from the war in Iran really arrives, blocking the Strait of Hormuz. What will happen to this euro that is currently very strong? A euro that we see the dollar in difficulty. We see our press every day telling us that the Chinese are failing, that the Russians are failing, that the Americans now, with this President Trump, who is not in line with what is the European mainstream, well, the country is now in ruin. But who is making projections on what could happen in Italy? Italy at this moment is a very fragile country, very fragile regarding these sources of supply, but naturally, this is not considered, the potential danger is not considered, the danger of this severe supply shortage. And then there was the other quite important issue that everyone overlooks, which was about the gas reserve. There have never been lower levels of gas reserves. However, of course, we no longer buy from Russia. It's a good market, but we can't buy from Russia. There is a discussion about the United States where there is an organized dependency on the United States, confirmed by this government. But we must have a minimum of flexibility. Flexibility means reaching the point where we are not cornered in terms of price quotation, and at the same time being able to afford to say no because we have different suppliers. Here we are completely flattening ourselves onto single supply channels that are controlled and not, let's say, in a free market. This is the concept that is emerging, and we need to give it some thought. So what happens? It happens that we need to keep things in line a little. We need to defend the country's interest of the country that in image of the country, which at this time with a conviction that has reached the Italian state, towards having to practically compensate Ms. Rachete for when she was blocked and rammed the hatches of the Guardia di Finanza. We are talking about 78 to 80,000 euros in damage compensation. So in Italy, anyone can come, anyone can impose anything. Is there always a judge who comes with the elements to give reason by interpreting the law? Well, we have a referendum coming up. This referendum might perhaps lead to not the politicization of the judiciary, but the depoliticization of the judiciary. And so this upcoming referendum will practically allow Italian citizens to have their say. Basically, if you are happy with the status quo, if you are content with the situation as it is today, well, vote no and you're fine. Otherwise, have the courage to say yes and allow this country, even in a strategic sector like justice, to be reborn.
Good afternoon. See you next time.